Hi, welcome to Object-Oriented Comprehensive Guide in Python. So we have reached to section number 4 in this training program, and that is to discuss exceptions and error handling and planning. In this section, actually, we're going to discuss the 3 outlines. First, we'll be looking at rising exceptions, and then how to handle exceptions, and finally, how to define your own kind of exceptions in certain cases. So let's go ahead and discuss the first outline in this section, and that is rising exceptions. Number of point for discussion in this outline. We will be looking first about the base exception class. Now essentially programs are very fragile, and it would be ideal if we could actually always return a valid result, but sometimes a valid result can be calculated. For example, it's not possible to divide by 0 or to access the 8 item in a 5 item list, etc. And that's why we could see that exceptions can take an important turn here to be discussed. In principle, exceptions is just an object. There are many different exception classes available, and we can easily define more of our own, in fact. And the one thing that they all have in common is that they inherit from a built-in class called the base exception class, this guy here. Let me actually go to Visual Studio Code and illustrate that. So we are in Visual Studio Code. If I would have to use this function called print, which we used a few times, we know the syntax of print. Let me just here on purpose do a mistake. If I try to save this and move to my terminal and try to execute this file, of course, I'm going to be encountered with that error. So what type of error is that? Is called a syntax error, which precisely here mentioning you are missing the parentheses using this printing function. Let's take another type. For example, if I would have to define x and say x is 4 divided by 0. Of course, now I am encountering a new type of error called zero division error. Let's take one more example of our +2. And then I try to run that. A new type of error called name error, where he's telling you this var is not defined. Let's see here, it's a variable again. And this time it's going to be a kind of dictionary, maybe A. And it has a value, let's call it hello. Let's try an attempt to bring a key that does not exist. You see, this is a key error. So this was just a trip to show you so many different type of errors you might encounter with, and if you wish, you can check the documentation about that. So from name error to key error to attribute error to indexed error and so on and so forth. You have a number of these kind of error. Now, the second important things to discuss once we understand base exception class, rising an exception. If we are writing a program that needs to inform the user or the calling function that the input are somewhat invalid. This is where you need to rise an exceptions. Let's take an example. Imagine if I would have a list and I want to restrict the user to append to that list only an integer and should be an even number, something like that. Now, how would we do that? I have two options. I can write a functions that check these conditions before appending any values. But instead, I'm going to use another technique, super functions that we discussed before, and override the append on the list. And if I want to just show you, if I use this dir of list, you will see that these are the dunders of functions that attach with the list. But one of them I am interested to override is this append. So what I would do in this case, maybe let me first of all define a class, and of course it's going to inherit from the list. Now the list is the parent class, we discussed that, and it's going to inherit all the functions, and we're going to be able now to override that append function. But here I'm going to define a function in particular. Let's call it a append. Now I want to check if it's an integer or not. So is an instance, this is also a built-in function that expects you to provide with 2 arguments. So the first is to pass the object or the instantiated object, and which type you are talking about. I'm talking about type integer. So is instant of that integer. Not, it means the condition is not met. Here I'm going to use the word raise. And which type of error we are talking about? We have seen some of these built-in errors. Let's make it a type error in particular, because it will be a type error, and then we can write even kind of message. This is the first condition. The second condition, I want to check if it's an even number or not. So I would say if this object, let's take the mode of 2, here I can raise a new error, and let's choose this time, instead of type error, let's call it a value error. Now it's the time to use the super functions that we discussed before. Why super? Because it's going to inherit everything from the list parent class. So super, and I could particularly talking about the append, and here I'm going to pass to the append the object that I have just checked. Now if I want to create a new object, and let's try now to append just normal number like 4, and if I want to print that object just to see the result, what it would look like, and there has been no problem at all. Let's now attempt to attach 3, and I expect now a raising error of a value error. And also if I change the type from 3 to a text, for example, and run that again, I will have now a type error, which is the first type of condition that we have done here. Lastly, the subject about the effect of an exception. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So if I would have to define a function, let's call it here no return function or whatever name. Let's here make a simple print here. And then here I'm gonna use the word raise, and I'm gonna use any exceptions, doesn't matter, just I will make a general exception. And in the second line, what I'm going to do, I'm gonna print one more line here. But let's try now to actually call in this function and see what will happen anyway. You could see now this is the first line, which is print this, and after that he raised this exception. So this exception, based on that, everything after that exception just completely terminated and the line of code will stop. Furthermore, if we actually have a function that call another function that raises an exception, nothing will be executed in the first function after the point where actually the second function was called. What I'm trying to say here, let's try to add one more function here, and then I'm going to call the no return function now, and after that let's make a print line here. Now if I would have to call this function now and try to run again, watch carefully what will happen. Now this is from the call function, so because I just called this function, this will be print. Now he go to no return. Now no return, he will print this is the first line, just happened here, and then the exception occurred and everything stopped from there. Next, we will be talking about how to handle exceptions in many different ways. That's exactly what we'll be talking about. I will see you then.